Jaquio, and welcome back to Bad 90s Music. I am coming at you live and direct from a magical place called The Past. Much like any other decade, the music of the 90s can be divided into these unique, distinct periods. Think of it like the early 90s, the mid-90s, and the late 90s. And it's that middle period that I've always been inordinately fascinated with. Most of the videos I've done prior to this one have come from around that time. And part of it is that it was when I had first started really getting into music in middle school. But I think what also interests me about it so much is how little overlap there is between that time period and the times directly before and after it. To me, this is where the decade really started to find its own identity. The stuff from the start of the decade was on its way out, and the stuff that would come in toward the end of the decade didn't exist yet. So in between, there was room for all this stuff that wasn't quite like the former, yet didn't end up resembling the latter either. And in rap and R&B, this is the period where you start to see stuff like Bone Thugs and Harmony, TLC's Crazy Sexy Cool, Brandy, Skee-Lo, Loonies, Brownstone, Diana King, Montel Jordan, stuff like that start to become really popular. Just this really unique, diverse stuff that was sort of blending together all these different elements of their respective genres and pushing them into these newer, more interesting directions. And of course, most of it did not last very long, but even the stuff that didn't often managed to end up making its own mark in the genre anyway. Groove Theory were a perfect example of this. Some artists end up hitting it big and becoming associated with a certain sound, even though they may not necessarily have been the ones who invented it. They just happen to be fortunate enough to strike the right chord at the right time. For every mainstream breakthrough that we see, there are always a number of unsung contributors who end up falling by the wayside over time. Groove Theory were a group from New York that formed when both of its members, Bryce Wilson and Amel Larrieux, became frustrated with the situations that they were both in musically, and decided to join forces and strike out on their own. Bryce Wilson was an erstwhile member of the rap group Mantronix in the early 90s, where he went by his old rap name MC Luva, and he was starting to turn his focus more to producing. Meanwhile, Amel Larrieux was an aspiring singer-songwriter at the time, who was working for a music publisher in New York, Rondor Music, as an assistant to the creative manager there at the time, Karen Durant.
Everyone needs a little room to breathe. She is your girl and understand he's your man. So tell the teacher what is the reason for those grief. Cause your little heart will get crushed if you don't rush the plan.
Now, Karen Durant and Brian Wilson went way back to her days working for Jive Records, where Mantronix was attempting to get signed for a time. So after he left Mantronix, Bryce would stop by Rondor Music from time to time to play piano and work out material. Karen got familiar with the music and lyrics that her young assistant Amel was writing, and she thought it had potential. So one day while she was listening to Bryce play his stuff, she had this insight that the two of them should be working together. It seemed as though each was the missing piece that the other one needed, and so she decided to introduce them to each other. Amel saw herself as more of a songwriter at the time than a singer, so when they got together, she showed Bryce the lyrics that she had written for what would end up becoming their biggest hit song, Tell Me. But originally she had written it for Trey Lorenz, aka the guy on Mariah Carey's version of I'll Be There. In fact, apparently you can still hear Trey's vocals in the background of this song. I'm not sure if he got credited for it, but if he didn't, then this is officially the second time I'm feeling bad for the guy in this show. So with the constant support and assistance of Karen, they eventually scored a record deal with Epic and released their debut in 1995 called Groove Theory. Amel's singing style was a lot more subtle for her time. She didn't have the range or power of somebody like Whitney or Mariah, so she compensated by singing her stuff as smoothly and as soulfully as possible, sounding more along the lines of someone like Sade. It's a much more low-key, laid-back vocal approach that perfectly suits the more smoothed-out, mellower, understated production work from Bryce. And at the time, a lot of mainstream hip-hop and R&B were incorporating these more throwback sounds from classic soul and jazz, and updating them with more modern and rap-oriented production. Stuff like Zhané, Escape, Aaliyah. In fact, this one song always reminded me of a particular Aaliyah song that came out in the following year. production on that track is a little darker and weirder, thanks to being the work of Timbaland. He's always got that sort of off-kilter, herky-jerky style to his production work. But for a while, this sort of influence was showing up in all kinds of places. Eventually, artists like D'Angelo and Erykah Badu would push it even further, and the whole movement would become to be dubbed neo-soul. Neo-soul was kind of this attempt to still make modern, rap-influenced R&B, but while retaining a lot of the more classic elements of the genre. The beats tend to be a little more toned down, the singing was more sultry, more focused on mood and richness than on technique, and even the songwriting was a lot more understated. Tell Me doesn't even really have a hook, because that's not the point of this style of music. The one element of the production in this song that stands out to me is the use of sleigh bells in place of the normal hi-hat sound. This is truly a groove theory. This idea that you can make music that's more focused on a vibe or on a specific tone and still have it be just as effective. So you just strip away all of the flashiness and glitz and even a lot of the overt catchiness of the genre, reducing it to its essences, and it becomes something a little different, more cool, calm, and relaxed, fun and engaging all at the same time. I have to imagine even if you were an older listener and weren't really feeling a lot of the R&B from this period, you could still appreciate the sound of someone like Groove Theory. And both in the production and the vocals, they're taking a lot of influence from stuff like Marvin Gaye, Al Green, Diana Ross, Dusty Springfield, a lot of that classic soul stuff. Tell Me reached number 5 on the Billboard charts, and the songs that kept it from climbing any higher are a straight-up murderer's row. Fantasy by Mariah Carey, Gangsta's Paradise by Coolio, Runaway by Janet Jackson, and Kiss from a Rose by Seal. The fact that they even got within spitting distance of such elite company is pretty damn impressive. And it's easy to see why it had so much crossover appeal. It takes a sample from a song called All Night Long by the Mary Jane Girls, written by Rick James, and it turns it into the sweet, breezy, almost innocent-sounding Love Jam. It's like not sappy enough to slow dance to, but a little too relaxed and easygoing to really rock the party. None of the other singles released from the album brought them anywhere near as much success, but there is a lot of good stuff from the album. Some of the songs get a little more philosophical, sort of deal with these heavier themes. Plenty of artists from the genre were introducing these different perspectives to the mainstream and tackling a lot of serious social subject matter. This is the song that actually convinced Epic that they should put out a record by them. The band had been signed to the label for a while, but it wasn't until they started looking to get this song added to a movie soundtrack that they actually decided to move forward with the recording process. Single from the album called Baby Love, but by that time it seemed like the audience for it wasn't really there anymore. Once the 90s got halfway over, things started to change fast. But it wasn't so much a lack of momentum that put an end to their partnership, it was more artistic differences that led to them splitting up. Basically, Amel wanted to go solo, Bryce saw himself as a leader and he was the more experienced one, so their connection ended up not working anymore, and they decided to part ways. This song was going to be on the abortive 2000 follow-up album The Answer, featuring Makeda Davis on vocals. I like it. It feels a little bit more advanced, a little more early millennium feel to it. I don't think the singer is quite as dynamic here, but I can see them coming up with something nice together eventually. This is a song that Amel recorded with Sweetback, the backing band for Sade. Honestly, it's not all that different from the stuff on Groove Theory's album. There's more of saxophone presence, more of a live instrumentation feel to it, but other than that, it could have fit in on there. Once they went their separate ways, both Bryce and Amel sort of branched out to other interests. Amel started her own label and released some solo stuff on there. Bryce produced Tony Braxton's You're Making Me High, probably the most successful track he'd work on, and then later became an actor and appeared in films like Beauty Shop and Hair Show. Apparently the group reformed earlier this decade, and there was some talk of them working on a new album, but so far nothing has really come to fruition yet. But I would recommend their one and only album to anyone who appreciates R&B or just chill, relaxing music in general. It captures a really unique vibe that I don't think has really been approached since. I could easily see someone like Janelle Monáe or SZA or even Frank Ocean trying to revive this sound at some point. So until next time, I am the Jaquio. This was Bad 90s Music. I'll see you sometime in the future.